Greetings, and welcome to the show. This is Wrong Place, Right Crime. I'm your host, Frank Zafiro, and this is the return of Aaron Philip Clark to the show. I interviewed Aaron a few years back when his first novel, Under the Color of Law, came out. It's a fantastic book, and we had a great conversation. So if you think Aaron's interesting here, there's not a lot of overlap between the two interviews. So go back and listen to that first interview. But you're here now, so why not listen to this second interview with Aaron when we talk about his books since the first book, including the newest one and the one to come, and some of the other projects he's been involved in. His career seems to have just taken off, and you know, couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Sometimes good fortune lands on the deserved, so good for him. And let's hear about it. Here's my interview with Aaron Philip Clark. Well, hey, Aaron, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, you were back a while ago. What year did Under the Color of Law come out?
That was 2021.
Yeah, so it's been five years. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, a lot has happened in the world, but a lot has happened in your world as well. And you know, let's explore that. But you know, before we do, folks who maybe didn't listen to the first episode, and I would encourage you guys to go back and listen to it because it was. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think you will as well. But maybe you could give folks just the real quick thumbnail sketch of your background and how you came to write that first book in the Trevor Finnegan series.
Yeah. So really, Trevor Finnegan was born from my experience as a LAPD recruit. And so I had been in the academy, come from a family of law enforcement. And I just felt like I wanted to, for a long time, I didn't want to write a cop story. I actually fought against it. And then one day I just started writing and it just kind of spilled out of me. So a lot of the experiences, and I wanted to write almost like in a tribute to my uncle who had been LAPD for over 20 years and had ultimately had passed. And so I wanted to write a book that he would be proud of. And so before he passed, he said, you know, if you're going to write about cops, he said, the only thing I ask is that, you know, you tell the truth. And no matter what that looks like, he said, you know, you tell it. He's like, I talked to you a lot, you know, how this job was, you know, how it impacted my life, positive and negative. And he said, I just want you to tell that story. And so I wrestled with it. And then years after I got out of well, really it was probably about a year or a little bit more after I got out of the academy, I really started to write that story. And so Trevor Finnegan is, you know, he's in Under Color of Law. He starts as a rookie detective and he's tasked with having to solve the crime of a dead Black recruit at a time where the city is already kind of a hotbed for controversy and corruption and all these things that are happening. And police brutality. And so they really want to sweep it under the rug. And Trevor gets tasked with having to solve this case. And they think he's going to fail. And it's kind of set up for him to fail. But he realizes as he digs deeper that if he does solve this and he gets justice for this dead Black recruit, he also is going to implicate himself because he is learns that he is actually connected to the death of this recruit. And so if he keeps pushing, he will ultimately uncover the truth, but that also means implicating himself in a much bigger crime.
I don't remember if we talked about this in our first conversation. I mean, it was 5 years ago, and so 5 minutes ago is already dim for me at this age. But there's a little bit of No Way Out, the Kevin Costner movie, in that setup, isn't there?
Yeah.
Were you familiar with that at the time?
Yeah.
Did that influence you at all?
Probably on a subconscious level.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit, you know. I mean, it's you know, Under Color of Law is a little bit is mixed in, you know, different books I was really inspired by. And really, you know, it's a struggle to try and tell a cop story that quote unquote hasn't been told. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so it's one of those things where I think that's why I kind of only made Trevor a cop in the first book. And after that, I wanted him to be a PI so that he had a little more freedom in a way. And at the same time, I mean, even book 3, this the one that the Bluest Night, it still moves like a police procedural, but Trevor is able to kind of go places and do things without necessarily having to be put into, the box of law enforcement, and the fact that if he does something, it could come back and kind of bite him because he does questionable things, that's been his whole kind of career.
Well, and the purpose of a PI versus a police detective differs too, right? I mean, the police detective is trying to get justice in the most literal sense, right? I mean, he's trying to create a case that can go to trial and result in a conviction. And so, yeah, there's a whole lot of things that detective may or may not be able to do, always with an eye towards how it's going to play in court. Whereas usually a private detective, they might be looking for justice as well, but they might just be looking for information. It's a much wider range of goals that a PI might have, and as a result, not as many of the restrictions, because the end result, might not depend on anything other than finding out information or something. And so I think you have a wider, a little more latitude there, right?
Yeah, I mean, and for Trevor, it's I think I never saw him being, a career detective with LAPD, because really at the end of Under Color of Law, it's very clear that he could have gone back, but it's very clear that that would have been almost impossible, very hard for him to do. And I toyed with having him return in this last book, the one that I just turned into the publisher, Blues for the Dead. I toyed with this notion of having him become a cop again, but I said no. I think he's so far from it now, and he's at a different place in his life, and I think it would have been a stretch to try to have him return to kind of bookend the series. But yeah, I mean, I think it's been more fun kind of writing him as a private investigator, actually. Just because he's able to do things, and he doesn't have to, do code 7. Like there's no meal break, he's like, that's what he wants to do, and he's not so much, having to fall in line with the whole procedural aspect of, most of these police procedural books that we read.
What would you say his relationship is with the LAPD? How is he regarded? I know the answer, but go ahead and let everybody else in on it.
Well, they use him as a cautionary tale. And so, that really kind of boils to the surface in the book that's going to come out next year, is that, they say, don't be a Finnegan. And so he's become this kind of, in the academy is like, he's become this entity of, chaos. And even though he did his job, that's the thing about it. And that's where he really struggles, because I did what I was supposed to do. It wasn't wrapped up in a pretty bow, but I solved the crime. I solved the case. And, but it's the fact that he didn't go along with procedure. He violated, different aspects of policing. Didn't necessarily commit. Well, that's arguable. Maybe he did commit a crime in doing so, but he wasn't prosecuted for anything. And a lot of these things he feels guilty about it, And so LAPD looks at him as not necessarily a failure, but more of, let's forget about that guy, and and his story almost gets through the LAPD lens. It's now they forget about the fact that he was actually a good detective, and he did the right thing, and now it's just retold and rebranded as, here's this cautionary tale, don't be a Finnegan, don't make these kind of mistakes, and that's it.
There's a saying in law enforcement circles that policies don't actually need numbers. They could just have a picture slapped beside them, because most every policy comes from a mistake that somebody made. So
very true.
so what you're describing is for people who might wonder, it's very true to life. Very accurate. So in Blue Like Me, he's private and maybe just share with folks just the thumbnail sketch of what occurs in that book, because there's a couple different conflicts going on. There's the main conflict, but there's some relationship conflicts going on for Trevor as well.
Yeah, so Trevor witnesses he has this partner, Sally Munoz, who he had a very interesting relationship. So in the first book, she's actually absent from the investigation because she's on maternity leave, and so he solves that case by himself, and then finds himself on this kind of stakeout, and he's watching Sally and her potentially corrupt partner, and he witnesses the partner's death, and then springs into action and tries to help Sally, but also doesn't want to reveal that he was there, and he ends up going after the assailant, and that opens up this whole kind of can of worms, so to speak, in the sense that whether or not Sally is dirty, and what she was really doing with her partner, and how it connects to this madam kingpin in Malibu, Cassandra Boyle, who's always she's a lot of fun to write, but how it kind of connects to her, and the fact that she may have had these officers on the take and different things like that. So ultimately, as Trevor investigates, he reveals that this crime does connect to his father, and this is really the first time his father Sean is kind of integrated into the story in a major way. And through that investigation, he understands. Trevor comes to the understanding that Sally was part of this, and he convinces her to turn herself in. And yes, while on the surface it's the right thing to do, Sally is looking at it as, okay, I'm listening to you. I'm going to do this thing with the idea that you're going to go out there and get justice and maybe bring in Cassandra Boyle, and I'll have a way to get out of prison. And that's kind of the understanding that they have. And when Trevor kind of falls short of that, Sally's stuck in prison, and she's really ticked off about it. And so in book 3, The Bluest Night, that kind of culminates as Trevor starts to work with Cassandra Boyle, the one person who, if was locked up, would potentially free his partner, Sally Munoz.
So a lot of internal conflict there for him.
Yeah.
And in that second book, in Blue Like Me, I'm trying to remember, it's been a few years since I read it, but if I recall, he was also having some personal relationship issues with his, was it Sandra?
Yeah. No, so basically he learns he has this daughter, and the woman that he was dealing with, it wasn't necessarily a romance, but the daughter Simone is produced from this relationship, and he's trying to be a good father. He's working really hard to try and be present now that he knows he has this kid out there, and so it's many layers, right? So it's not just the investigation, but it's also that B story of how he's going to deal with this. And then he also has
so an artist girlfriend that wants to go overseas or something, if I remember right.
Sarada is going to France, and she is a chef, so she owns a bakery in LA.
That's it.
So he's supposed to, that's the plan, is that he's going to finally leave LA. It would be his first time out of the country, and they're going
Dude, you need a break. Come to France with me, right? Let's get some
like, let's get out of here. And he can't even make that work, because he ends up getting caught up with Boston, who was the cop who got away in the first book, who makes a return, and he ends up losing his, David Bergman, who was his friend and kind of a mentor. And Boston ends up killing him, and it's another loss for Trevor. That's why the last book is called Blues for the Dead, because it's very much an ode to all the characters who have kind of died, who have been meaningful in Trevor's life, and it's his only way to kind of get a broad justice. And it's more of a representation of justice for all these things that have kind of happened.
Well, I got to tell you, it sounds like I don't remember the book very well, but I actually remember it quite, the feel of it really well, and the broad strokes of the stuff. And as you talk about it, it all comes back. But that I'll tell you, that Boston character, she was one of the more chilling antagonists I thought that I'd read in recent years. I mean, the threat, the sort of Damocles that she represented throughout the entire book, and then the culmination of that, I thought was really, really well handled, and was, contributed to the book being a page turner. And it's hard, like you said, Sarita. I thought it was Sandra for some reason. I could see why I would mess that up, but her desire to go away and to offer him this, this beautiful alternative, that tension had a lot of weight to it as well. Sometimes that's clearly, that's a trope. I mean, we both recognize it as that. It's not like you invented that, and tropes, happen all the time. We all write with tropes. It's how you handle them, right? Are they clumsy? Are they stock, or do they begin as a trope and then become something closer to real life, something that's frightening or endearing or concerning, or whatever it takes to make it feel real. And I felt like that conflict was very real for Trevor. I mean, if you're reading that and you're like mad at him for not, come on, man, just go to France. Don't be an animal. You can still be in your daughter's life. It was like 3 months or something, 6 months. It wasn't forever, right? Just do it. It'd be good for you. You need it, man. But that's good writing and good storytelling when that's the case. I enjoyed that. No, I haven't had a chance to read The Bluest Night yet. You said he teams up with Cassandra. What's the premise there? What can people expect when they crack that open and see that new partnership?
So it picks up 2 weeks after the end of Blue Like Me. So at the end of Blue Like Me, Trevor's in the process of selling his father's condo, and so there's a realtor there, and they had just had a shootout there. So the real Trevor's asking, hey, is this gigantic blood splatter going to be a problem? And she's like, oh no, not in this market. This LA market, he'll probably get a couple $1 million offers. And so, Trevor's like, hey, okay, I'll get somebody to come clean this up. It's not going to impact the sale. And in walks this woman who he thinks is there because they're going to have this, they're going to cover it up with a rug, and they're going to have this open house later. And he thinks she's there. She's just early. And so she says, no, I'm actually looking for he's looking for Trevor's father, Sean. And she says, hey, it's about our son. So this is the first time Trevor has learned that he has this brother out there, and that now he just learned that he's actually missing. And so that's where The Bluest Night picks up, is that Trevor gets a call, and it's not just the brother who's missing, but he's also missing with his girlfriend, Keisha. And so they get a call that they found Keisha's body in Malibu. And so Trevor, he says, okay, his father calls him Sean. He says, hey, we got to get to Malibu. So that's where it really kicks off. And then they go to Malibu and they realize, yes, indeed, Keisha is dead, and they don't know how. Her body's just out in this kind of marshland, and they don't know, it's kind of in the middle of this canyon, and they don't know how she got there and any of the circumstances surrounding it. And as they're leaving, his brother then stumbles into the road, and he's been beaten, and he's wearing odd clothes, and they have no clue what happened to him, and he can't remember anything. And keep in mind, he's never met Trevor. Trevor doesn't know anything about him. And they take him to the hospital. And while at the hospital, he starts to kind of ramble and say things about what might give hints of what might have occurred. And so what's ultimately revealed is that they had been kidnapped, and they had been taken and had been held for a certain period of days. And that he doesn't remember what happened to Keisha. And that's where Trevor and his father kind of have to come in and investigate this, because they're believing, the sheriff department is believing, that his brother may have killed his girlfriend Keisha. And so they're not convinced of that. And so Cassandra Boyle, who is a Malibu resident, Trevor has this bright idea of, why stay in a hotel? We can utilize her, even though she's a drug dealer, and the idea being that Trevor doesn't have many friends. And so she's really the closest thing to a friend that he has, and he has more in common with a potential drug dealing kingpin who could be involved in all other kind of things and criminal activity, and he stays there with his father, and his father is jamming him in the ribs, saying, "Man, what are you doing?" Meanwhile, Serta is still in France, and so she has no clue what's going on. And so his father is saying, "I didn't know you knew women like this, and I didn't know you knew supermodels." And he's like, "She's none of those things." It's like she's potentially a criminal, but Trevor doesn't want to tell his father that, because he knows the moment he says that, his father's going to really jam him up and say, "Hey, we need to get out of here." But Trevor's looking at it as, "Hey, this is opportunity for us to have a home base. She has all these connections within the community, and we can really utilize her, so that it'll be easier for us to solve this case." And so he convinces himself of that. And the whole time it's this kind of tension between them, because he's in this woman's house, and and she's confessing all these feelings that she has, and he's like, "Is this going to be a problem? Do we need to go?" And she says, "Look, you're not casting any spells here. I'm fine. You can use the house. You do whatever you need to do." And then later it's revealed that she's actually somewhat connected to these kidnappings herself, and so that's kind of the ball that drops, and Trevor is forced to have to reckon with that. And the fact that so many people in his life have betrayed him.
It's an interesting character to write, one who has been on the inside of law enforcement, who was a police officer, who is then actively operating outside of that, and not in the criminal realm exactly, but certainly not 100% what other costs would call legitimate. That's a little bit of a narrower band of character than the general PI character. My own Stefan Kopriva series is that way, and it's interesting to have that character, because much like Trevor, he can deconstruct some of the police behaviors that he sees, and the lens he puts on them are sometimes different and other times not. And I think it's an interesting take for the reader to see, whereas like at times he might validate the righteousness of something that the cops did and how they handle it. And other times he might, bristle at the behavior or the assumption or the attitude or something. That insider now outsider vibe is kind of fun to play with.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think definitely in The Bluest Night, it's more of that. It's more of, and I mean, and the fact that he's in Cassandra Boyle's house. He could be there gathering evidence that could help free Sally, right? So it's like, he could be doing that. And in his own way, he convinces himself that that's one of the benefits of being there. But he gets so wrapped up in trying to figure out what's going on with his brother and trying to make sure his brother doesn't end up in prison, which is really more of a request for his father, because Trevor's not 100% sure he didn't do it. So, he finds himself kind of wedged between, this notion of, hey, well, we do this for family, and this other thing of, well, you got Sally over here who's been more of a sister to me than I know. I don't even know this guy. So it's this kind of idea where I wanted to play with allegiance a little bit, and the notion of allegiance, and who we need to feel like we're required to help. This idea of, well, it's all about blood. And so Trevor gets to this point where he's like, well, just because we're related doesn't mean I have to be this sort of champion for this person when this person clearly is not the best individual. And while he believes everybody deserves justice, he also recognizes that justice looks different for a lot of people. And so, it's not always about locking somebody up. For Trevor, it's a deeper sort of thing. It's a moral justice that he's after. He struggles to make people whole when they've been victimized. And that's always been his goal. And I think that as a police officer, it was hard for him to do that, because sometimes if you're a cop and some evidence gets thrown out, or so many things that can happen, so many technicalities that could disrupt and jeopardize a case, and that could jeopardize someone getting justice. And so Trevor is solely focused on getting justice no matter what it takes. You know, it has nothing to do with evidence or any of that stuff. It has everything to do with him being able to prove you did this thing. And so in The Bluest Night, he has to take justice as he gets it. And it's not pretty, but it's fair. That's all I can say. It's not pretty, but you know, it's fair. It happens.
Well, I mean, listening to you talk, Aaron, it's like you know, you're writing a classic PI novel that reads like a police procedural, but really lands almost squarely in the noir subgenre,
for sure,
tonally, or at least thematically, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
So the first book and the series as a whole, you've done some adaptation for television for this. In fact, I believe, unless my internet detective work is incorrect, that Under the Color of Law won adaptation award.
It did. So it won Book Pipeline, and so the Book Pipeline adaptation award allowed me to write the pilot for Under Color of Law. And then we were able to take that out. And I was able to get a manager from that pilot. And so I had been a screenwriter before I wrote fiction. And so I just kind of had to dust those chops off a little bit. And we put together a really good pilot. And so we took it out, and most recently it was at Sony. And that didn't go forward, but we did have a producer, we had a showrunner, we had a star. Everything was really in place, but you know, it's Hollywood.
And you can absolutely probably not share any of those details, I imagine.
No, at this point, I think it's fine, you know. But
so who was the star?
So Yahya Abdul Mateen, who's a little bit older. So he's most recently he was Wonder Man in the Marvel series. And then he's actually doing an adaptation of Man on Fire, which is kind of cool. I'm excited to see that.
That'd be the third time that book's been.
I know, right? So yeah,
I don't know. You got to have some wafos, I think, to remake a Denzel Washington movie, though. I mean, that takes some chutzpah, I think, because I mean,
it does. Well, this will be a series. So
okay. If you're going to do it, maybe that's the way to do it.
Yeah, and I'm wonder if it's going to be closer to the book or if it's going to be closer to Denzel's adaptation, where they set it in Mexico and everything. But it's one of my favorite books for sure.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's set in like the 1950s or something, isn't it? I mean,
it's was it 70s?
70.
Yeah.
He went into the army in the 50s and served in the 50s.
Yeah.
That's right. Creasy, right?
Yeah, John Creasy. Yeah.
John. Who's the writer? Quinn.
It's
of course. Yeah. Now
it's one of those things. Now I can't think of his name.
He didn't write a ton actually, but the ones that he did write, you're like, oh, he wrote that. It was one of those.
Yeah. Guys. And most of them were made into movies and stuff. So he had a solid run. I can't think of his name right now. But I remember the book. I mean, you know, it was different. It was because he was going up against the mob. I mean, it was set in Italy and, you know, a little bit different. But what's interesting is, not to go on a tangent, but for Equalizer 3, in some ways, it was closer to that book, you know, Denzel's character in that, because he ultimately was going up against, you know, the mafia or LCN, La Cosa Nostra kind of character. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really interesting that they kind of went that route. But yeah, I mean, you know, it would have been, and it's not over, right? With these adaptations and stuff, you never know. Someone will call out of the blue or something like that, and you know, we're still shopping it and stuff. But there's been a few little, you know, close calls, and then something happens, and the bottom kind of falls out. So,
AJ Quinnell.
Yes, yeah.
And for those who haven't seen the original 1987 film starring Scott Glenn. It's really good too, and it's got some pretty neat filmmaking moves. I'm always a little bit of a sucker for the flash forward to start to open.
Yeah.
You see that in the first season of Narcos. They start with a scene from like episode 7 and then go back to the beginning, and they do that in this movie with Scott Glenn as well, if I remember right. Quinnell also wrote Blood Ties and In the Name
Blood
of
Ties.
the Father, both of which were movies.
Yeah.
So if you had your choice, like if they said to you, you're the showrunner and anybody in the entire industry will say yes if you ask, who's playing Trevor Finnegan?
Ooh. I really like that's the thing. It's the age. Trying to figure out the age of how I would kind of go about it. But I think if I was looking at it, I would actually start with book 3. I would start with The Bluest Night, where he's a little bit older. But if I did get a green light and they said, "Hey, we want to start him younger," I like the guy. Is his name? But he recently did the horror film called Him. He was the football player in that, the main character. And I cannot think of his name, but he looks physically more like Trevor
Tyreek Withers.
Yeah, Tyreek Withers. That's literally kind of how I envision Trevor looking like. He's got a little height to him. He kind of has a kind of little athletic kind of look to him, but at the same time, there's something there where you could tell he's introspective and he looks like he could be a good detective. And so that's kind of who I would say. And then the father, Sean Finnegan, I don't know, Sean Finnegan. There's so many good actors who could.
Oh yeah, Sean in his 50s, right?
Yeah, he's in his
probably 50s. Yeah, I mean, you could age him a little bit. You have to age him a bit if you went Denzel there.
That would be
a little bit, and you have to age up Michael B. Jordan. So those two biggies are out right there.
That's true.
Let me ask you this, Aaron. Going inside baseball just a tiny bit, but writing is writing, they say, but screenwriting and writing a short story or a novel, those are 3 different disciplines. Certainly the page versus the screen are different approaches. What do you think of the biggest difference is between sitting down and writing under the color of law for the page and then adapting it for the screen? And it obviously is, I would expect a TV adaptation is different than a film adaptation as well. Or are they? I don't know, because I haven't done it. So you tell me.
Well, I would say that a novel is easier to adapt for a series, in my opinion. A short story is really great for film. But
why is that?
There's so much story in a novel that to cram that into 2 hours is really hard. But the hardest thing, I think, when you're trying to adapt it for a series is figuring out where to start, because you can start anywhere. It's a whole entire book. So it's kind of like, hey, like you were saying, if you decided to open with a scene that takes place episode 7, and then you want to go back, there's so many things that you can do. There's a little more freedom there, I think, than trying to deliver on a 95-page screenplay. For film. And I think for me, when I was working on the adaptation, I really needed to make sure that it was visual. That's the thing. So I added some things. I made it so, Trevor has a background in art. So for the pilot, he was carrying around a little sketchbook. And while, most detectives were relying on the crime scene photographers, Trevor was actually sketching out the crime scene, and he's putting arrows and he's doing like little diagrams and all these different things, and he's writing off in the margins things that he has to think about later. And so they get weirded out by this. He's treated a little bit as odd. And I wanted
a little bit like Matthew McConaughey's character in True Detective.
Yeah, the tax man, right? Yeah, they call him the tax man, that kind of thing where it's a visual thing that sets him apart from the other detectives. And so you have to put your you have to put that screenwriter hat on and think, okay, how can I visually show that this individual is different, that he's a little bit, out of the box, and they're going to treat him a certain kind of way accordingly, because he makes people uncomfortable. It's kind of like even in Seven, right? Morgan Freeman's character, Somerset, oh, we'll be happy when you're gone, Somerset, because he's asking those questions, and he's a little bit odd, how he investigates and he's moving about the crime scene, makes these other cops kind of like, this guy again, so I wanted to kind of play on that. But the thing is, Trevor's so much younger, and so they know he got there based on maybe not necessarily quote unquote earning it, but he was fast tracked to be able to become a detective. And so that hovers over all the relationships he has.
So it's very visual focused and then dialogue driven. That's the biggest difference, you would say, or
I would say, but even then, as I try to have less dialogue, I try my best just to focus on the visuals.
Oh, interesting.
As much as I can, and I only have characters actually speak when they have to. And so I found, and trust me, to get to this point with that, I think I did 4 drafts. And I think the first one was way too literary. I was still in the book mindset. And after that, I said, okay, no. Less is more. They want to see a lot of white space. So the more visual, hey, this is happening, that's happening. You have a little bit of dialogue here, a little bit of interaction. And as long as that dialogue kind of lands and says is everything you need to say, maybe in a sentence, where in a book it might take you, maybe 2-3 sentences because you want to kind of wax poetic and you want to be literary. But in this, it's crisp, to the point, declarative sentences that will give somebody, paint the picture in their mind very quickly, where they feel like they're watching it. And so, that's the biggest struggle, I think, coming from writing books and then jumping to to screenplays.
I heard someone say, this, I either that or I just came up with it, I don't know. But the idea that, when you build when you write a novel, you're building your own house, right? But when you write a screenplay or a what's it called for a TV show, a teleplay, you're actually writing a blueprint so someone else can build a different house.
Yep.
And so I could see where you want to create a very vivid picture and very, like you said, declarative, clear sentence, and at least give them the starting point. If they want to knock down a wall and make the living room more open, they will, right? Yeah. You're going to, you might not recognize the place when you walk in and it's finished, but at least you did your part through the screenwriter. So, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up a couple of things before we go that are kind of interesting about you that I don't know that people would know right off the bat. You've done a couple of collaborations, one of which was pretty high profile.
Yeah. So I work with 50 Cent on The Accomplice. So we co-wrote that. The Accomplice now is going forward with Peacock, and it's going to be a TV show. And Taraji P. Henson will star as the main character in that, Nia Adams, and so she is the first Black female Texas Ranger, and so she's going up against a thief who, last time I checked, and I don't know if this is official, but the thief character was potentially going to be Idris Elba, which I think is really cool because the character is a little bit older, and he was a Vietnam vet who actually gets. He doesn't go out of his way and make it a goal in life to become this international thief, but his only way to get out of Vietnam with his bride, who he marries there while he's serving in Vietnam, is the only way to do that is through this shady kind of character who offers him this deal, like, I can get you out of here, but you're going to have to work it off. And the way you're going to work it off is you're going to work for this crime syndicate. And so ultimately he ends up not stealing things, because one of the things me and 50 talked about was we didn't want to, or I should say not stealing money. One of the things we talked about, we didn't want to deal with having to move money. And I didn't particularly want to write that. So, it's not interesting. We've seen it so many times. And one of 50's favorite films is Heat. So we were talking about it, and we both enjoy the film. But once you get to the point where you got Val Kilmer and De Niro running down downtown LA streets with, bricks of money and assault weapons, well, judging by their size, I don't think they would be running. So, money is incredibly heavy, and you got duffel bags of it and assault weapons. So it's one of those scenes where you're just like, it's so much fun to watch, but you're like, this is not reality. We're not even near that unless these guys were bodybuilders. So we didn't want to go that route. So instead, Desmond the thief steals secrets and then basically threatens to expose these secrets, or sometimes they're actually things. He's able to get into people's homes and take things that they've hidden, that he says, hey, you're going to need to transfer this amount of money if you want this back. And so it's much easier, and it's almost more power if you know people's darkest secrets. And so that's what he trades in. And so so that's headed to be a series. I also did a collaboration with Ben Crump. His book is out now, Worse Than a Lie. And so I worked with him on that as well.
So working with 50 Cent, Stringer Bell being maybe on the show, that's are you, I've talked to some folks who do collaborations with with celebrities essentially, and sometimes there's a pretty hefty NDA associated with that. Are you able to share what the process was like, or is that covered under that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't go into, I guess, too many details, but I will say that 50 is incredibly generous. So I originally was not supposed to really be on the cover. It was going to be a completely ghost written project, but my hat off to 50 because he told everybody I did. He went on national TV. He went on Jimmy Fallon, I believe, and or either that or no, Stephen Colbert. And he said, hey, Aaron wrote this. We worked together. We collaborate on the story, but Aaron wrote this. So he didn't have to do it. It's not many celebrities who would do that. And he put me on the cover and gave me the credit. And I'm really appreciative for him for doing that. There's other people I've worked with who are nowhere near his caliber of celebrity who don't even do that. You know what I mean? And so, and in fact, who are supposed to give me acknowledgments and then don't do that, so, it always will surprise you. Some of these folks, people you think will have a huge ego, will be some of the most humble people who are like, no, you did it. Here's the credit, there you go. And then people who you would think would be very humble are ultimately try to erase you from the process, so it's very interesting.
I think that's why they say don't meet your heroes, because, sometimes you can be disappointed. But I guess the flip side of that, as you point out, is sometimes you might be surprised. Like, I think musicians in general, rappers probably right up there with rock and roll stars, even more so, have a reputation of having large egos. And so it's nice to hear that that's not across the board, so that there's individuals who don't necessarily adhere to that stereotype.
Yeah.
So will you be involved in the show, or are you just
I hope so. It's still early, so I don't even believe they have a showrunner yet. So as that kind of shapes up, hopefully it'll make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but
sure.
In Hollywood, it makes sense.
We think so, but Dan, we were talking about off mic earlier about another writer we both know, Dan Bronson, who was on the show recently, and Dan is big, Hollywood history. He's been in there quite a while, and Dan pointed out the hierarchy in Hollywood when he said, "Did you hear about the dumb starlet? She slept with the writer." Because basically the writers are the lowest form of or lowest on the pecking order anyway, which is just astonishes me. But everybody I've talked to has affirmed it. Nobody says different. I would think it would be different in maybe in a TV writing room, but
a little bit different, a little bit.
I would think that given the premise of the Accomplice, will that be the title of the show? Probably. Do you think?
Yes.
So, like a lot of the dynamic that Trevor Finnegan experienced, both the racial component and um, the different kinds of ethical or moral conflicts, I would think you could bring some of those lessons to bear in the writing room, if not directly, certainly, indirectly and, subtly applied.
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I mean, for the accomplice, she deals with some of the similar issues as well. So Nia Adams, the opening is the fact that they're going after this gang that's knocking over banks through Texas, and they believe the gang is funded by one of the cartels, and her partner basically shoots one of these guys who's ultimately giving up. I mean, he surrendered, he's dropped his weapon, and she's now put in this ethical quandary of saying, okay, yes, these guys were horrible. They turned, downtown Houston into a war zone, and it's awful. But this guy was giving up. We should have taken him in. And so as they're awaiting this internal investigation, that's how she ends up getting sent to this town where there's this other bank robbery that is just odd, and no money is taken. And instead there is an old safe that's been opened, and nobody knows what's in there. There's no documentation or anything like that, but the thief knew that the safe was there and takes something out of there, and leaves all the money in the vault and all the people. And she says, well, why am I here? I said, well, we need you there because we're trying to keep you out of the fire, because we don't know what's going to go on with this internal investigation, as they're trying to figure out what really happened with this bank robbery. And so that's how she even gets caught up in this whole mess.
I like that unintended consequences. I mean, they're basically centered on what isn't even a milk run to try to keep her out of the line of fire, and she basically walks right into a bigger shitstorm than the one she's leaving, it sounds like.
Yeah. So, and people who read my books will see that there's many similar themes across the board. But I like to play with this notion of the ethical and the moral, and then also how integrity is a tool, and how if you have a character who's steadfast and understands, even in a gray area, that there is a right or wrong. There's always going to be some clear right or wrong. And sometimes that right may be harder to follow, but it's there. And so I like characters who make those hard decisions. And so that translated very well to The Accomplice. And hopefully that'll be one of the foundational themes in the show, is that it's not easy. And for Nia Adams, and it's set in early 2000. So for Nia Adams, she's also identifies as a lesbian, and so that becomes a thing. And she's dating this judge, and this is in Texas. So you could almost get a sense. Excuse me, a sense.
Sounds like she might mess with Texas.
Yeah, so she is a problem for some people.
Well, before we go, I do want to touch on one last thing. You have gotten into the podcast arena. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I have a podcast. It's called The Culture Point. And I interview authors on there, but we focus less on kind of craft and all of that. Because I think as a teacher, I get a lot of that, and I spend my day doing that. And so I wanted to come up with a podcast where we explore different subcultures. Cultures and subcultures within crime novels and books in general. And so I have coming up, my next guest will be Tupac's brother, Maurice Shakur, who wrote a memoir. So it's not just fiction, it's nonfiction as well. But Maurice wrote a memoir about his life and coming up within the shadow of his younger brother. And I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. And then after that, I may have a couple of people who are in politics. I won't say who, but a couple of people who were in politics and things went kind of south. But folks who at least represent, as I said before, who come out of a particular subgenre, whether or not it's a political subgenre, some sort of ideology. or subgenre in the sense of, subculture in the sense of, hip hop, that culture and how that shaped, and then how that merged with, especially in the 90s, with politics as well, and activism. And so Maurice really represents that. So I'm having fun with it. I don't do as many shows because it's actually quite a lot of work and hard. So I don't do as many shows as I would want to do. But when I am able to do it, I enjoy it. And so some of the interviews will be live and will actually be done in the studio. So I'm kind of moving into making it more of a kind of a breakfast club thing where people actually can see us and we're having the conversation, and they can watch the video. So,
and that's the Culture Point.
That is the Culture Point, yes. And so all those episodes are available, mostly on SoundCloud, but you can get it on iHeart Radio and Apple as well, and Spotify as well. So those are available.
And if people want to find out more about Trevor Finnegan or the collaborations or your other work, where's the best place to do that, or to see you in person?
Yes, please go to my website. So that is aaronphilipclark.com. That's my official site. You can also find me on social media at Real APC Books, and that is on Instagram and Twitter, which I am not on, or formerly known as Twitter X. But really, Facebook is probably where most of my fans are, if you are followers, I would say. So that's where I post a great deal. So if you find me on Facebook, it's Aaron Philip Clark. And my upcoming events are going to be Thriller Fest. So I'll be there doing a craft fest, which I'll be teaching on. What will I be teaching on? Story structures. And then I also will be at LA Times Festival of Books as well. And I'll be doing a panel on crime and law enforcement. And that'll be moderated by Paula Woods. And I'll be joining my fellow panelists will be Todd Goldberg. So good friend of mine. So I'm excited for that as well.
Yeah, Todd's a funny guy. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
Well, I will tell you, Aaron, I have some catching up to do because I'm a book behind, but I'm looking forward to reading the newest book, and hopefully at some point we end up at a conference together so we can raise a glass in person, because this is the second time we've had a chance to talk, and I really enjoyed it each time. So
thank you. Likewise.
So the newest book, The Bluest Night, is out now, part of the Trevor Finnegan series, which might be coming to a television near you at some point in the future. Same with The Accomplice, which you wrote with 50 Cent, and that's closer to the screen. And you can catch the podcast, The Culture Point, as well. So folks, check out Aaron Philip Clark. Great storyteller and a good guy. Aaron, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
All right, Aaron Philip Clark, busy guy, lots going on, pretty exciting how his career's taken off. I've read the first 2 books in this series, folks, and I can vouch for him. They're, like he said, procedural reads, but kind of also, detective novels at the same time. But and he does a pretty good job of exploring the depths of human character, I'd say. Some fascinating characters to explore yourself in those books. So check out the Trevor Finnegan series by Aaron Philip Clark. All right, on the next episode of Wrong Place or Right Crime, there won't be a guest. I'm actually going to use the opportunity to talk about Under a Raging Moon and the 20th anniversary expanded and revised edition. Share with you, the listener, what that's all about, why I did it, what I did, and where you can get it. So if you're a fan of the River City series and are wondering what this new expanded and revised 20th anniversary edition is all about, we're going to have a short episode the next time out to share that with you. So check that out. That steals a little bit of the thunder from the Zafiro update, in which I usually would share that that's happening. But there's a little bit of other news to share. The 2 more recent books that are out there, the Sandy Banks thriller A Hard Favored Death, book 3 in that series. You can get that, including in the box set that has all 3 books in it. And you can also pick up the Split List, 4th book in a series I wrote with Eric Beetner, who, by the way, if you are not checking out his work, you are missing out in a big way. You want to talk about a very lean and evocative writer who can do action like just about nobody else. That's Eric Beetner, and he's got about 4 different series that are just cracking. They're just incredible. Right now, the Carter McCoy series is the most recent, and it's pretty hot. But you can go back to the Lars and Shane series and you read that, or if you're into cars or kind of that sort of heist that involves driving. His Rum Runners series. I think he actually calls it after the family name, but it's that you'll see it when you go to a site. That's just a great series as well. But the Carter McCoy's added a little bit of poignancy to his style. Like I think maybe a little more than is present in some of his other work. So anyway, Eric Beetner, you should be checking him out. If you want a little bit of a taste, a bridge from my work to his, then the Bricks and Cam Jobs are a great way to do that. They're in a 4-book box set, starting with the backlist. But if you've already read those, and the new one is the Split List, and that's a pair of novellas. Each one a solo adventure for Bricks or Cam. Eric wrote the Cam one as he wrote the Cam character in the series. That's called the Justice List. And then I wrote the Delivery List, which features Bricks. So you can get them individually or grab the box set, Bricks and Cam Jobs. The only other piece of news I'll share this time out is that I am working on revisions for the next River City book. So all this news on River City number 1 and River City number 16 is getting closer to being ready for beta readers, which means it's getting closer to being ready to release. And so in this one, Katie McLeod is a sergeant, which she has already been for at least a book. And she is tasked to head up a street crimes unit that has to deal with the flood of stolen vehicles, which are, of course, driven by the drug trade and so forth. And so she has to put together a team and head that team up as they kind of realize they bit off a little more than they could chew, or at least a pretty full mouthful. So that is called The Quick of the Night, River City book number 16, and it'll be out this year for sure. So look for that, River City number 16, The Quick of the Night. Put that on your radar. All right, I want to say thank you to Aaron Philip Clark for coming on the show again for a great conversation. As always, thanks to you, the listener, for being here. And I will beg your indulgence for the next episode, which will be a discussion of Under a Raging Moon, River City number 1, the 20th anniversary expanded and revised edition. Hope you'll join me. Until then, this is Frank Zafiro reminding you that sometimes you got to be in the wrong place to write crime.